Samsaradava-nalalita-loka Tranaya karuna-gana-ganatvam Praptasya kalyana gunanavasya Vande Guru Shri Charanaravinam Mahaprabhu Kirtana Nitya Gita Vaditra Madhyan Manasorasena Romanchakampa Shutarangavadyo Vande Guru Shri Charanaravinam Shri Vigraharadhana Nityananam Shingarathan Mandiramarjanado Yuktasya bhaktam saniyunjatopi Vande Guru Shri Charanaravinam Chaturvida Shri Bhagavat Prasado Swadana Triptan Haribhaksha Sangram Kritraiva Triptim Bhajata Sadaiva Vande Guru Shri Charanaravinam Shri Radhika Madhava Yodapara Madhurya Leela Ganarupanam Nam Pratikshanasvadanalolupasya Vande Guru Shri Charanaravinam Vande Guru Shri Charanaravinam Vande Guru Shri Charanaravinam Nikunjayo no Rati Keli Siddhai Yayali Bir Yukti Rapikshaniya Tatrati Daksha Ativallabhasya Vande Guru Shri Charanaravinam साक्षादरित्वेन समस्तशास्त्रे उक्तस्तथा भायत एव साध्वी किन्तु प्रभोर्या प्रिय एव तस्य वन्दे गुरो श्रीचरणरविन्दम् यस्य प्रसादो भगवत्प्रसादो यस्य प्रसादो न गति कुतोऽपि जयं स्तुवांस्तस्य यशत्रिसाद्यं वन्दे गुरो श्रीचरणरविन्दम् 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 नमो विष्णुपदाय कृष्णपृष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिवेदान्त स्वामीति नामिने जय श्रील प्रभुपाद नमस्ते सारस्वते गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेष शून्यवादी पाश्चात्य देशतारिणे जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्त वृंद चैतन्य नित्यानंद जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्त वृंद चैतन्य नित्यानंद जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्त वृंद Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Krishna, Hare Hare, Rama, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Jaya Radha Nilamadva, Radhe. Jaya Radhe, Jaya Radhe, Jaya Radhe, Jaya Shri Radhe, Jai Radhe. Jaya Jagannatha, Jaya Baladeva, Jaya Subhadrama, Jaya Sudarshan Chakra. Jaya Sitaram, Jaya Sitaram, Sitaram, Jaya Lakshman Hanuman. Jaya Lakshmi Narasingha, Jaya Lakshmi Narasingha, Lakshmi Narasingha, Jaya Lakshmi Narasingha. Jaya Gauranitai, Jaya Gauranitai, Gauranitai, Jaya Gauranitai. Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Jaya Guru Deva, Jaya Guru Deva, Guru Deva, Jaya Guru Deva. Nitai Gaura Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaura Hari Bol. Hari Bol, Nitai Gaura Hari Bol.
Jai Vishnu Par Paramsa Prabhajakacha Suttara Sarasishima Isvan Gay Sabhacharmin Bhakti Viranta Samaraj Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Iskon Pratishta Bhiviti Samstapakachara Vaishnav Siramani Parit Pavana Srila Prabhupada Ji Maharaj Ki Jai Shri Gauriya Guru Vargarpati Udhar Ki Jai Shri Rupa Sanatana Bhatta Raghunath Jiva Gopal Bhatta Das Sat Goswami Prabhu Ki Jai Namacharya Shri Haridas Thakur Ji Ki Jai Ananta Kuti Vaishnava Ki Jai Prem Se Kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai Jai Param Dayal Shri Nityananda Prabhu Ki Jai Jai Pramanama Sankirtane Ka Janaka Prema Purushottama Shri Sachinandana Shman Gauranga Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Gaura Hari Mavrana Avatar Ki Jai Golokera Pramadhana Nam Sankirtan Jaga Ki Jai Yoga Dharma Hare Krishna Mahamantra Ki Jai Grihapnidanga translate of book distribution Seva Ki Jai Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopakupna Radha Kun Samakun Giriraj Govardhan Ki Jai Shri Brajabhum Vrindavan Mathurudham Ki Jai Delosh Shri Radha Nilamadhava Ki Jai Shri Mayapurnavadip Eka Chakradham Ki Jai Paramakaruna Shri Gurnita Ki Jai Shri Purushottama Kitra Jagannath Vridham Ki Jai Shri Shri Jagannath Swami Baladev Prabhu Smaspudrade Visudasan Chakra Bhagwan Ki Jai Bhakti Sarva Vigna Vinashana Kanishingare Bhagwan Ki Jai Jagangama Jamanamai Ki Jai Tulasi Maharani Vrindi Devi Bhakti Devi Ki Jai Shri Mathuradharani Ki Jai Shamaveta Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai Nitai Gaur Hari Pramanandi. All glories to the Assembly Bodies. All glories to the Assembly Bodies. All glories to the Assembly Bodies. All glories, all glories, all glories to Shri Guru Shri Gauranga. Namaste Narasimhaya
Prahlada Ladadaine
Prahlada Ladadaine
Hiranyakashipurvakshaha
Hiranyakashipurvakshaha
Shilatankanakalahe
Jaya Shilatankanakalahe
Ito Narsimha Paratho Narsimha
Ito Nisingha Parato Nisingha
Ito Narsimha Parato Narsimha
Ito Nisingha Parato Nisingha
Yato yato yami tato Narsimha
Jaya Jato Jato Jami Tato Nisingha
बाहे नरसिंहा हृदये नरसिंहा
बाहे नृसिंहा हृदये नृसिंहा
बाहे नरसिंहा हृदये नरसिंहा
बाहे नृसिंहा हृदये नृसिंहा
नरसिंह कनिं शरणं प्रपदे
नरसिंहमदिं शरणं प्रपदे
अवकर कमल बरे नाखाम अद्भुत सिंहा दालिता हिरण्यकशिपु तनुबिंगा केशवदीता नरहरि रूपा जय जगदीश हरे जय जगदीश हरे जय जगदीश
अवकर कमल बरे नाथाम अद्भुत सिंहा दालिता हिरण्यकशिपु तनुबिंगा केशवदीता नरहरि रूपा जय जगदीश हरे जय जगदीश हरे जय जगदीश हरे
केशवधृता नरहरि रूपा जय जगदीश हरे जय जगदीश हरे जय जगदीश हरे
केशवदीता नरहरि रूपा जय जगदीश हरे जय जगदीश हरे जय जगदीश हरे
जय नरसिंहदेव जय नरसिंहदेव जय नरसिंहदेव जय नरसिंहदेव जय नरसिंहदेव जय नरसिंहदेव
नृसिंहदेव जय नृसिंहदेव
जय प्रहलाद महाराज प्रहलाद महाराज प्रहलाद महाराज जय प्रहलाद महाराज
जय
प्रहलाद महाराज प्रहलाद महाराज प्रहलाद महाराज जय प्रहलाद जय प्रभुपाद 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 जय जय प्रभुपाद 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 प्रभुपाद
जय प्रभुपाद
जय जय गुरुदेव 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 जय जय गुरुदेव
जय जय
गुरुदेव 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 जय जय गुरुदेव सिंहदेव भगवान की जय प्रहलाद महाराज की जय श्रील प्रभुपाद की जय
जय।
गौर प्रेमानंद हरि बोल।
श्री वृंदाई तुलसी देवाय प्रियाय केशव सत्य विष्णु भक्ति प्राणे देवी शतवताय नमो नमः वृंदाई तुलसी देवाय प्रियाय केशव सत्य विष्णु भक्ति प्राणे देवी सतवताय नमो नमः वृंदाय तुलसी देवाय प्रियाय केशव सत्य विष्णु भक्ति प्राणे देवी सतवताय नमो नमः जय श्रीमती तुलसी महारानी वृंदा देवी की
Namo Nama Tulasi Krishna Preyasi Namo Nama
Tulasi Krishna Preyasi Namo Namo
Tulasi Krishna Preyasi Namo Nama
Tulasi Krishna Preyasi Namo Namo
Radha Krishna Seva Prabhu Eya Vilashi
Radha Krishna Seva Prabhu Eya Vilasi
Radha Krishna Seva Prabhu Eya Vilashi
Radha Krishna Seva Prabhu Eya Vilasi
Shetomaya Sharanaloy Tada Vachapurnahoy
Chitomara Sharanala Karavanta
Kripa Kori Korotare Vrindavanavasi
Tumi Kripa Kare Kara Kare Vrindavanavasi
Moraya Vilas Vilas Kunjeriya
Moraya Vilas Kunje Diyava
Nayane Heri Bosada Jugala Ruparashi
Aminayane Vivasada Yogala Ruparasi
Eni Vedana Dara Sakiranugata Koro
Eni Vedana Dara Sakira Nugata Koro
Eni Vedana Dara Sakiranugata Koro
Eni Vedana Dara Sakira Nugata Koro
Sevari Kara Diye Koro Nijadasi
Sevayari Kara Diye Koro Nijadasi
Sevari Kara Diye Koro Nijadasi
Sevayari Kara Diye Koro Nijadasi
Dina Krishna Dase Koi Eye Namora Hoy
Ina Krishna Das Koi Enamora
Dina Krishna Dase Koi Eye Namora Hoy
Ina Krishna Das Koi Enamora
Shri Radha Govinda Preme Sada Nabasi
Shri Radha Govinda Preme Sada Enabasi
Shri Radha Govinda Preme Sada Nabasi
Shri Radha Govinda Preme Sada Enabasi
Yani Kani Chapapani Brahma Hatyati Kani Cha
Tani Kani Sapapani Brahma Hatari Kani Sa Tani Tani Prana Santi Radha Kina Pade Pade Jani Kani Sapapani Brahma Hatari Kani Sa Tani Tani Prana Santi Radha Kina Pade Pade Jani Kani Sapapani Brahma Hatari Kani Sa Tani Tani Prana Santi Pradakshina Pade Pade
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Jaya Tulsi Maharani, Jaya Tulsi Maharani, Jaya Tulsi Maharani, Jaya Tulsi Maharani.
Jaya Tulsi Maharani, Jaya Tulsi Maharani.
Jaya Vrinda Devi, Jaya Vrinda Devi, Jaya Vrinda Devi, Jaya Vrinda Devi.
Jaya Vrinda Devi, Jaya Vrinda Devi, Vrinda Devi, Jaya Vrinda.
Nitai Gaura Haribol, 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 Nitai Gaura Haribol.
Shri Vrindai Tulasi Vai Priya Kesava Satya Vishnu Bhakti Pradidevi Satavataye Namo Namaha. Shri Vrindai Tulasi Vai Priya Kesava Satya Vishnu Bhakti Pradidevi Satavataye Namo Namaha. Vrindayai Tulasi Devai Priyayai Kesava Satya Vishnu Bhakti Pradidevi Satavataye Namo Namaha. Jai Shrimati Tulasi Maharani Vrinda Devi ki.
Bow before you again and my
Tender service to Shri Radha and Krishna. Bhavati shelter of your wishes fulfilled. This time is upon him, you make him resident over Vrindavan. I desire that you also give me a residence, pleasure groves, Shri Vrindavan Dham. Thus within my vision, I will always behold beautiful pastimes of Radha and Krishna. I beg to make me a follower of Kavadances of Raj. Please give me the privilege of devotional service and make me your own maid servant. His very fallen and lowly servant Krishna, please. May I always sing in love Shri Radha and Govinda. Shri Mati Tulasi Maharani Vrinda Devi ki Jai. Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Shri Krishna ki Jai. Chaito Darpanamajanam Bhava Mahadavagni Nivapanam Shri Akari Vachandika Vikaranam Vidyavadu Jivanam Anandam Buddhivardhanam Pradipadam Purnamrita Swadanam Sarvatmasnam Paramparam Jayati Shri Krishna Sankirtanam Nam Namakari Baudha Nija Sarva Shaktis Tatrarpita Niyamita Shmarane Nakala Etadrisita Vakripaya Bhagavan Mamapi Durdhaevamidrisham yajaninanuragahu Trinarapi sunichena tarorapi saishnuna Amaninamanadena Kirtaniya sadahari Adhanam na janam na sundarim Kavitam vajagari shakamaye Mama janmani janmanishwari Bhavata bhakti rahituki tvai Vainandatanu jakinkaram Paritama vishame bhavambudo Kripaya tava pada pankaja Sitaduli sadrisham vichintaya Nayanam galarashudharaya Vadanam gadagadharudaya gira Purakair nishitam vapukada Tava nama grahane bhavishyati Juga itam nimishena Chakrusha pravrusa itam Shunya itam jagat sarvam Govinda virahena me Asli shabhapadaratam pinastumam Adarshanar marmahatam karotuva Jata tathava vidadatu lampato Mat pranatastu saivana paraha Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Sikyastakam Ki Jai. Namo Mahavarandaya Krishna Prema Pavati Krishna Krishna Chaitanya Namini Guru Tushin. Glory to the Shri Krishna Sankirtana. We cleanse the heart with the dust accumulated for years and extinguishes the fire condition of life, repeated birth and death. This Sankirtan movement is the primary benediction for humanity at large because it spreads the rays of the benediction moon. It is the life of all transcendental knowledge. Transcendental bliss and enables us to fully taste the nectar for which we're always anxious. O my Lord, your holy name alone can render all benediction to living beings, and thus you have hundreds and millions of names like Krishna and Govinda. In these transcendental names, you have invested all your transcendental knowledge. There are not even hard and fast rules for chanting these names. O my Lord, out of kindness, you enable us to easily approach you by holy names, but I'm so unfortunate that I have no attraction for them. Once you chant holy name with the Lord in a humble state of mind, thinking oneself a Lord and strolling in the street, one should be more tolerant than a tree, devoid of all sense of false prestige, and should be ready to offer respect to others. In such state of mind, one can chant the holy name of the Lord constantly. O Almighty Lord, I have no desire to accumulate wealth, nor do I desire beautiful women, nor do I want any number of followers. I only want your cause of the devotional service, birth after birth. O son of Maharajananda Krishna, I am your eternal servitor. Yes, some or other I have fallen in this ocean of birth and death. Please pick me up from this ocean of death and place me as one of the atoms at your lotus feet. O my Lord, when will my eyes will be decorated with tears of love flowing constantly when I chant your holy name? Or will my voice choke up? And will the hairs of my body stand on end the recitation of your name? O Govinda, feeling your separation, I am considering a moment to be like 12 years or more. Tears are flowing from my eyes like torrents of rain, and I feel all vacant in the world in your absence. I know no one but Krishna is my Lord, and he should remain so, even if he handles me roughly by his embrace, or makes me broken-hearted by not being present before me. He is completely free to do anything and everything, for he is always my worshipful Lord, unconditionally. Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Shri Kyastakam Ki Jai. There are 10 offenses in the matter of chanting the holy name of the Lord that should be avoided. They are as follows. 1, to blaspheme the devotees who dedicate their life for propagating of the name of the Lord. 2, to consider the names of demigods, Lord Brahma, to be equal to or independent of the name Lord Vishnu. 3, to disobey the orders of the spiritual master. 4, to blaspheme the Vedic literature or literatures and pursuits of Vedic version. 5, to consider the glories of chanting Hare Krishna to be imagination. 6, to give some interpretation to the holy name of the Lord. 7, to commit sinful activities on strength of chanting the holy name of the Lord. 8. To consider with chanting Hare Krishna as one of the auspicious ritualistic activities which often varies as Suri activity, karma kanda. 9. To instruct the fearless person by the glories of holy name. And 10. To not have complete faith in chanting the holy names and to maintain material attachments even after understanding so many instructions in this matter. It also an offense to be inattentive while chanting. Every devotee who claims to be Vaishnava must carefully guard against 10 offenses in order to quickly achieve the desired success. Krishna Prema. Now let us offer our most humble obeisance unto all the Vaishnavas, devoted to the Lord. They are just like desired trees. They can fulfill the desire of everyone, and they are full of compassion for the fallen conditioned souls. Jai Bancha.
Om Aganyati Mirandasya Yananjana Salakaya Chaksurumilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manubhistam Shakatam Bhutali Swayam Rupa Kadayam Dadati Swam Tadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Jitahapajikamalan Shri Gurun Vaishnavam Sha Shirupam Sargajatam Sahaguna Kuntan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sarvaitam Savadutam Parijanam Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shirata Krishna Padam Sahaguna Lalita Shri Vishakam Sa Tamaham Vishnu Padaya Krishna Shrimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Tinamani Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvisesa Sunyavadi Vaskatya Desatarine Jai Namo Shrimati Bhakti Vishnudanta Saraswati Tinamini Shri Varsavani Devi Dayitaya Kripabdaye Krishna Sambandha Vijnana Dayane Prabhave Namaha Madhur Ujvala Premadya Shri Rupanuga Bhakti Da Shri Gora Karuna Shakti Vigrahaya Namostute Namaste Gauravani Shri Murtaye Dinatarine Rupanuga Virudhapa Apasidanta Dvantaharine Namo Gora Kishoraya Shakshad Vairagya Murtaye Vipralamba Rasambode Padambujayate Namaha Namo Bhakti Vinodaya Sachitanandanamine Gora Shakti Swarupaya Rupanuga Varayate Gora Vir Bhava Bhumestvam Nirdesta Sajjana Priya Vaishnava Sarvabhoma Shri Jagannathayate Namaha Vanchakalpaturabhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Namo Mahavadanyaya Krishna Premapadayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gurachase Namaha Panchatattvatmakam Krishnam Bhaktarupa Swarupakam Bhaktavataram Bhaktakam Namami Bhaktasaktikam Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopisha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Jayatam Surator Bangor Mama Manda Mater Gati Matsarvasva Padambojo Radha Madanamola No Divyad Vindaranya Kalpadumadaha Shimad Ratnakara Simasanastito Shimad Radha Shila Govinda Devo Prashtali Bihi Sevyamano Smarami Shiman Rasa Rasarambi Vamsivata Tatastita Karsan Venu Swaner Gopir Gopinatak Striestuna Tapta Kanchana Gorangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vishabhanustute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasudeva Gaur Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Shri Guru Pranama prayers ki jai. Shri Brahma Samhita ki jai. Ishwara Parama Krishna Sachitananda Vigraha Anadir Adir Govinda Sarva Karana Karanam Chintamani Prakarasad Masukalpa Riksha Laksha Vritesh Surabir Abhipalayantam Lakshmi Sahasra Satasam Brahma Sevyamanam Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Venum Krananda Matarinda Dalayataksham Parhavatam Samasitam Buddha Sundarangam Kandarpa Koti Kamaniya Vishesha Sobam Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Alola Chandra Kalasadvana Malya Vamsi Ratnam Gadam Pranayakeli Kalavilasam Shamam Chibanga Lalita Niyata Prakasam Govindam Adi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Adbhutani Vasyabdas Kalendriya Vrittimanti Pasyanti Panti Kalyanti Chiran Jaganti Ananda Chinmaya Sadujvala Vigrahasya Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Advaitam Achyutam Anadim Anantarupam Adyam Purana Purusham Navayovanam Cha Vede Sudurlabam Adurlabam Atma Bhakto Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Pantastu Koti Satavatsara Sampragamyo Vayoratapi Manaso Munipungamanam Sopyastiyat Prapadasim Yavichintya Tatve Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Ekop Yasora Chayatum Jagadanda Kotim Yaschakti Rasti Jagadanda Chaya Yadanta Andanta Rasta Paramanu Chayanta Rastam Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Yat Bhava Bhavita Dio Manajasta Taiva Samrupa Rupa Mahima Sanayana Pusa Suktarya Meva Nigama Pratatastuvanti Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Ananda Chinmaya Rasa Pratibhavitabis Tabirya Eva Nijarupa Taya Kalabi Goloka Eva Nivasata Kilatma Bhuto Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Premanjana Churita Bhakti Vilochanena Sandaksate Desu Vyakanti Sama Sundaram Achintya Gunaswarupam Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Ramadi Murti Sukalani Menatistan Nanavataram Akarud Bhuvane Sukintu Krishna Swayam Samabhavat Paramam Pamam Yo Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Yasya Prabha Prabhavato Jagadanda Koti Kotisvaseshu Vasudadi Vibhuti Benam Tad Brahma Niskalam Anantam Ashesha Bhutam Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Maya Hiyasya Jagadanda Satani Sute Trigunya Tad Vishaya Veda Vitayamanam Sattva Valambi Parasatvam Visuddha Sattvam Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Ananda Chinmaya Rasat Mataya Manasu Ya Praninam Patipalam Smaratam Upetya Leelayatena Bhuvanani Jaya Yajasram Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Goloka Namni Dijatamni Tale Chatasya Devi Mahesu Haridama Sutesu Tesu Te Te Prabhava Nichaya Vitashtayena Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Shristi Stati Pralaya Sadhava Saktireka Chayeva Yasya Bhavanani Vibharti Durga Ichyanurupam Abhyasya Chachesta Tesa Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Shiram Yata Dadi Vikara Vishesa Yoga Sanjayate Nahitata Pritakasti Hetoho Yasambhutam Apitata Samapaiti Karya Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Departure Eva Hita Santaram Abhyuteta Dipayate Vivita Hetu Samanu Dharma Yastad Regeva Hicha Vishnu Taya Vibhati Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Yakar Nanarna Vajale Bhajatisma Yoga Nidram Ananta Jagadanda Saroma Kupaha Athar Shaktim Avalambya Param Swamurtim Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Yasyaika Niswasitakala Matavalambya Jivanti Loma Vilaja Jagadanda Nataha Vishnur Mahansa Yasya Kala Vishoiso Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Pasman Yatasma Sakalesu Najesu Tejaha Sriyam Kiyat Prakatayat Apitat Vatatra Brahmaya Esa Jagadanda Vidanu Karta Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Yat Pada Palava Yugam Vinidai Kumbha Dvande Pranama Samayesa Ganadi Rajaha Vignan Vihantam Alamasya Jagatrayasya Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Agnir Mahiga Ganabambu Murudisascha Kalastatatma Manasiti Jagatrayani Yasmad Bhavanti Vibhavanti Vishanti Yamcha Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Yaschaksuresa Savita Sakila Grahanam Raja Samasta Suramurti Rasesha Tejaha Yasya Gaya Brahmati Sambrita Kala Chakra Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Dharmo Tapapa Nichaya Sutayas Tapamsi Vamadi Kita Patagava Tayascha Jivaha Yadata Matra Vibhava Bhakata Prabhava Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Yastrindra Gopa Matavendra Mahoswa Karma Bandhan Rupa Falabhaja Amatanoti Karmani Nirdahati Kintu Jabhakti Bhajam Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Yam Krodha Kama Sahaja Pranayadi Bitti Vatsalya Moha Guru Gora Vasevya Bhavahai Sanchintya Tasya Sadrasim Tanamapurete Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Shayakanta Kanta Parama Purusha Kalpataravo Dumabumish Chintamani Ganama Itoyam Amritam Kataganam Natyam Gamanam Apivamsi Priyasaki Chidanandam Jyoti Param Apitad Aswatyam Apicha Sayacha Siradi Bihi Shavati Surabi Byascha Sumahan Nimesa Dakyova Rajati Nahiya Trapisamaya Bhaje Svita Dvipam Tamaham Ihagolakam Itiyam Vidantas Te Santakshiti Virachara Katipaye Ishwara Parama Krishna Sachitananda Vigraha Anadiradir Govinda Sarvakarana Karanam Shri Brahmasamita Ki Jai, Shri Guru Vastika Prayers Ki Jai. The spiritual master is receiving benediction from the ocean of mercy, just as a cloud pours water on a forest fire to extinguish it. So the spiritual master delivers the materially afflicted world by extinguishing the blazing fire of material existence. I offer my respectful obeisance unto the lotus feet as such a spiritual master who's an ocean of auspicious qualities. Chanting the holy name, dancing in ecstasy, singing and playing musical instruments, the spiritual master is always gladdened by the Sankirtan movement of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Because he's relishing the mellows of pure devotion within his mind, sometimes his hair stands on end, he feels quivering in his body, and tears flow from his eyes like waves. I offer my respectful obeisances unto the lotus feet as such a spiritual master. The spiritual master is always engaged in the temple worship of Shri Shri Radha and Krishna. He also engages his disciples in such worship. They dress the deities in beautiful clothes and ornaments, clean their temple, and perform other similar worship of the Lord. I offer my respectful obeisances unto the lotus feet as such a spiritual master. The spiritual master is always offering Krishna 4 kinds of delicious food, analyzes that which is licked, chewed, drunk, and sucked. When the spiritual master sees that the devotees are satisfied by eating Bhagavat Prasada, he is satisfied. I offer my respectful obeisances unto the lotus feet of such a spiritual master. The spiritual master is always eager to hear and chant about the unlimited conjugal pastimes of Radhika and Madhava and their qualities, names, and forms. The spiritual master aspires to relish these at every moment. I offer my respectful obeisances unto the lotus feet as such a spiritual master. The spiritual master is very dear because he is expert in assisting the gopis who at different times make different tasteful arrangements for the perfection of Radha and Krishna's conjugal loving affairs within the groves of Vrindavana. I offer my most humble obeisances unto the lotus feet of such a spiritual master. The spiritual master is to be honored as much as the Supreme Lord, because he is the most confidential servant to the Lord. This is acknowledged in all revealed scriptures and followed by all authorities. Therefore, I offer my respectful obeisances unto the lotus feet as such a spiritual master, who is a bona fide representative of Sri Hare Krishna. By the mercy of the spiritual master, one receives the benediction of Krishna. Without the grace of the spiritual master, one cannot make any advancement. Therefore, I should offer my respectful obeisance unto the lotus feet as such a spiritual master, who is a bona fide representative of Sri Hare Krishna. By the mercy of the spiritual master, one receives the benediction of Krishna. Without the grace of the spiritual master, one cannot make any advancement. Therefore, I should always remember and praise the spiritual master. At least 3 times a day, I should offer my respectful obeisance unto the lotus feet of my spiritual master, His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 1, Text number 20. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Itam Rajan Bharatam Eva Varsam Kalena Yavad Gatavan Prabhasam Tavach Chasasa Sitim Eka Chakram Ekata Patram Ajitena Partaha Itam, like this, Vrajan, while traveling, Bharatam, India, Eva, only, Varsam, the tract of land, Kalena, in due course of time, Yavat, when, Gatavan, visited, Prabhasam, the Prabhasa pilgrimage site, Tavat, at that time, Sasasa, ruled, Shitim, the world, Eka Chakram, by one military force, Eka, one, Atapatram, flag, Ajitena, by the mercy of the unconquerable Krishna. Partaha, Maharaja Yudhishthira. Translation by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Thus, when he was in the land of Bharatavarsa, traveling to all the places of pilgrimage, he visited Prabhasakshetra. At that time, Maharaj Yudhishthira was the emperor and held the world under one military strength and one flag. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. More than 5,000 years ago, while Saint Vidura was traveling the earth as a pilgrim, India was known as Bharatavarsa, as it is known even today. The history of the world cannot give any systematic account for more than 3,000 years into the past. But before that, the whole world was under the flag and military strength of Maharaja Yudhishthira, who was the emperor of the world. At present, there are hundreds and thousands of flags flapping in the United Nations. But during the time of Vidura, there was, by the grace of Ajita, Lord Krishna, only one flag. The nations of the world are very eager to again have one state under one flag. But for this, they must seek the favor of Lord Krishna, who alone can help us become one worldwide nation. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Thus, when he was in the land of Bharatavarsa, traveling to all the places of pilgrimage, he visited Prabhasakshetra. At that time, Maharaj Yudhishthira was the emperor and held the world under one military strength and one flag. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Yesterday's verse made a special point that Vidura was traveling the whole earth, or the earth, and he simply performed duties to please the Supreme Lord, Hari. His occupation was pure and independent. He was constantly sanctified by taking his baths in holy places, although he was in the dress of a mendicant and had no hairdressing nor a bed on which to lie. Thus he was always unseen by his various relatives. Then the verse before that, it says, he began to travel alone, thinking only of Krishna, through various holy places like Ayodhya, Dwarka, and Mathura. He traveled where the air, hill, orchard, river, and the lake are all pure and sinless, and where the forms of the unlimited decorate the temples. Thus he performed the pilgrim's progress. So we explained that pilgrim's progress is a Christian term that means you learn by traveling to different places, and especially if they're holy places, places of pilgrimage. And there was also a description. In text 22 it says, on the bank of the river Saraswati there were 11 places of pilgrimage, namely Trita, Usana, Manu, Pritu, Agni, Asita, Vayu, Sudasa, Guha, and Shradadeva. Vidura visited all of them and duly performed rituals. So the river Saraswati is not visible anymore. It used to be. And it runs somewhat in the opposite direction of the Ganges. The Ganges starts in the Himalayas and goes to the Indian Ocean. But the Saraswati starts, I think, also in the Himalayas, but goes toward what is modern Pakistan. And there are many holy places in what is called Pakistan today, many holy Vedic places of pilgrimage. But most of them are not active. Maybe there's one or two, but most of them are not active anymore. But there were a lot of them, and Vidura visited all of them. There's a statement of 11 such places. So many of those places have been in decline or in ruins due to the separation of Pakistan from India. Okay, and also in the verse 21, it says that at the place of pilgrimage at Prabhasa, it came to his knowledge that all his relatives had died due to violent passion, just as an entire forest burns due to fire, produced by the friction of bamboos. After this, he proceeded west, where the river Saraswati flows. So we see Vidura, when he understood that his brother Dhritarashtra and his brother's son, or his nephew, Duryodhana, had gone crazy. They were actually crazy. They were going to oppose the Pandavas on whose side Krishna was present. That means that they're definitely going to lose the war. And then when he was insulted, Vidura was insulted terribly by Duryodhana, he actually thanked him, but within his heart. He didn't show his happiness of being insulted like that, because now he had a legitimate reason to leave his brother Dhritarashtra and the Kuru dynasty, and walk away from it. And what was the purpose? It was not to take up mundane life. It was to go to places of pilgrimage and ultimately meet Maitreya Muni, to be instructed in transcendental knowledge. Now, Vidura was already advanced in transcendental knowledge, but he respected Maitreya Rishi because he considered him more advanced than himself, and he submitted himself to learning from him more and more information about Krishna and how to follow Krishna consciousness and how to become a genuine devotee. Why? Because he realized that having spent so much time with the Kurus, and especially his brother, and having to deal with Duryodhana, some of that bad association had rubbed off on him. And therefore, to purify that, he sought, he did a pilgrimage. He went to holy places, bathed in the holy ponds and rivers in those places, and associated with genuine sadhus. And eventually, he met Maitreya Rishi and sat down firmly and listened and asked questions and listened from him. This is the real pilgrimage. It's not simply visiting places and taking baths in holy waters. It's much more significant to meet genuine saintly people and get their blessings in the form of instructions on how to become more and more pure in their Krishna consciousness. Okay, so all these instructions are teaching us how to become Krishna conscious. We do not become Krishna conscious by having what we would call an easy, laid-back life. We have to make an effort to be always in contact with genuine devotees and hearing their discourses and engaging in practical, regulated devotional service, starting early in the morning and going through the whole day and being able to take rest early so that they can get up early in the morning the next day and follow the same path of orienting all their activities to Krishna consciousness. And that's possible, even in this world, even though there's so many negative things happening in this world. It is possible to be always Krishna conscious, and Prabhupada proved it by opening temples in cities. He didn't open them in the countryside. And he trained people in the cities to become Krishna conscious. And cities are the last place you want to be trained because it's full of Maya. But yet, Prabhupada proved that Krishna consciousness, when it's practiced sincerely and purely, it's so powerful that it can overcome all that Maya, and it can purify people. So, therefore, there is no obstacles to becoming Krishna conscious today, if one is willing to follow the process properly. And it requires lifestyle adjustment and eventually initiation by bona fide devotee and devotees, Shiksha and Diksha gurus, and then being regularly engaged in devotional service on a daily basis, hearing, chanting, remembering, etc., etc. So, and being trained constantly in more and more skills of Krishna consciousness, like deity worship, like Sankirtan, like preaching. And so Prabhupada gave 4 principles. He said that preaching is the essence, books are the basis, and utility is the principle, and there's one more. Utility is the principle, books are the basis, and preaching is the essence. And there's one more. I'll think about it in a minute. So, books are the basis. Everything we do must be based on Shastric evidence. And when we say that preaching is the essence, that's the proof that you have heard properly and read and assimilated this knowledge. Therefore, the natural activity after having such training is to preach effectively. And then then there's utility is the principle. Well, you try and take always the path of least resistance, and that is one time, I asked the question of Prabhupada. I said, how do we preach to the Muslims? And he said, well, you preach Krishna consciousness as you've heard it, right? And if a person's not willing to listen, then what can you do? It's better to spend your time with people who are willing to listen than people who are not willing to listen, right? So that's utility is the principle, you know. Yeah, purity is the force, right? The most important. Purity is the force. Well, how do you become pure? By strictly following the regulative principles and hearing on a regulated basis, the same way that you want to come to Mangala Aarti, you should also hear the class. So, if we do these things, then we will be successful in Krishna consciousness. So, it's very important that the process of Krishna consciousness is followed strictly. And how do we follow it strictly? Well, you will see, the more you follow it strictly, the more you become happy and peaceful. And therefore, we discussed a little bit yesterday what it means to be in the mode of goodness. Because from the mode of goodness, one can transit or segue to the mode of transcendental goodness. Look at that word, what? Segue, S-E-G-W-A-Y. So, and there are 16 points that give a good idea of what the mode of goodness is. And one is control of the mind and the senses. 2 is tolerance. 3 is discrimination. 4 is sticking to one's prescribed duty. 5 is truthfulness. 6 is mercy. 7 is careful study of past and future. But that doesn't mean you study American history or the history of Russia or things like that. You study Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam, and which includes the best explanations of the Mahabharata and Vedanta Sutra. You don't even have to read Vedanta Sutra or Mahabharata. You simply study Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam, and eventually Chaitanya Charitamrita and Nectar of Devotion. Those 4 books, you'll get all the education, and you get all the understandings of the Vedanta Sutra and Mahabharata and the Puranas and the original 4 Vedas. Then there is truthfulness and mercy and careful study of past and future. Okay, and then satisfaction in any condition, generosity, renunciation of sense gratification, faith in spiritual master and masters, 6 Diksha Gurus, being embarrassed at improper behavior, charity, simplicity, humility, and satisfaction within oneself. This is you could say 16 points that give you a good idea of what the mode of goodness is. There's more information, and we'll go over that as we get closer to Ananda Mela. But if we can at least understand these 16 points and explain them, you're on your good track of understanding the mode of goodness. Now, what is destroying culture today? The culture of Sanatana Dharma, and in general, what used to be the traditional culture of the United States, now it's being destroyed and being replaced by another culture. And culture means how people do things and what they think is right and wrong. So, due to modern education and due to publicity and social media and things like that, television, radio, so the following things are being promoted. 1, there is no God. 2, there's nothing after death. 3, there's no absolutes. Everything is relative. 4, therefore, sense gratification is the purpose of life. 5, abortion. And it also includes death with dignity or aid in dying. life-ending medications, and physician-assisted suicide. It's all in the same thing with abortion. It's basically killing people, right? Has become a norm. It's not something exceptional. It's normal now in this culture, and we're being taught that it's a normal thing. Then number 6 is gender neutrality or fluidity. And then LGBTQ plus people and transgendered kids who can engage in sports and other competitive things. And discussion in elementary schools of LGBTQ plus people and sex education, even in elementary school, and pretty soon it's going to start in kindergarten. And also the proliferation of the acceptance around the world of by Margaret Sanger, who was the founder of abortion on demand, or in other words, Planned Parenthood. She's the founder of it. She went to India twice and promoted it, and the Indian government accepted abortion as a necessary thing in culture, and it hit its pinnacle under Indira Gandhi, where they shifted from trying to abort, women, to sterilizing men. And because of that, there was a huge backlash eventually, where it said, and the BJP was advertising, if you vote for Indira Gandhi, you'll lose your genitals. There was a Hindi phrase like that, right? So, all right. And then number 7 is false science. Darwinism, Big Bang, and other speculative theories of the beginning of the universe. Freud, with his sexology, and Marx, with his atheistic socialism or communism. And next is atheism in general. Next is pornography made public. And next is feminism and equality of sexes by mixing of roles and perverting the roles of gender. And there's a book by an Indian woman. Her name is Amiya Srinivasan. She wrote a series of essays and compiled it into a book which says, "The Right to Sex." And number 11 is the internet and social media for social engineering and cultural change. And that includes television, movies, radio, etc. Number 12, race baiting in politics to divide the races. And race baiting means the unfair use of statements about race to try to influence the actions or attitudes of a particular group of people. It's meant to divide a nation. And number 13, easy divorce, and which includes women in the workforce and politics and women's rights, and also the Me Too backlash, and public approval of women's rights and need for reform and activism and full-blown women's movement. Now, I don't have anything against women, but this has changed the normal, what you would call culture of women staying at home and taking care of children, and being basically the first guru of their children, and with the help of the husband. But all these roles have changed now. And should women be protected? Yes. Should they have equal rights? Yes, they should have equal rights as far as learning, education, and as far as their roles as the main person in the stability of the family and so forth. But should easy divorce be proliferated and suggested all the time? No, because the breaking up of a couple after marriage is devastating to children, you know, and it should be not, let's say, easily available. It can be available if there's violence, but other than that, there should be a lot of counseling to maintain the vow of marriage, which is the basis of social peace and equilibrium. You break the vow of marriage, there's chaos in society, and we're seeing that today. Many kids are growing up without parental supervision, and they're being given all kinds of, introduced to all kinds of negative things, and therefore you end up having what's called Varna Shankara, uneducated, untrained children who just create havoc in society. In fact, in the news yesterday, there was a group of kids in a small town that decided to play double dutch. What is double dutch? It is a game where you go and knock on people's doors. You first knock on the front door, then you run and knock on the back door, then you run and knock on a window, then you knock again. And one kid, and this whole group of kids were doing this in this small town, and one kid came to one house and started doing that, and the person inside shot him with a shotgun through the window. In other words, the window broke when the bullets hit it, and it hit him, and he ended up almost dead. Fortunately, he's not dead. So this is what's happening when kids are not trained. They end up doing all kinds of bedlam, of chaos, and very bad behavior. And they revolt also by not listening to good advice. Okay, and then besides that, the worst of the worst is impersonalism. Now, why do I say that? Well, this is very interesting. I want to talk a little bit about Hindutva. I don't know if you know much about it, but the Hindutva movement is based on what's called integral humanism. Now, what is integral humanism? I'm going to read a few things about it. First of all, integral humanism was a set of concepts drafted by Deen-Dayal Upadhyaya as a political program, and was adopted in 1965 as the official doctrine of the Jan Sangh, which later became the BJP. Upadhyaya borrowed the Gandhian principles such as Sarvodaya, progress for all, Swadeshi, domestic, and Gram Swaraj, or village self-rule. And these principles were appropriated selectively to give more importance to cultural, natural values. Now, there's nothing wrong per se of these things, right? Sarvodaya, progress for all. Swadeshi, basically live in your country and be patriotic to your country, and try to avoid living in big cities, and emphasize village life. And Gram Swaraj, village self-rule. In other words, the panchayat system for the village. There's nothing wrong with these systems, but it depends how you interpret them, right? So now we're going to see how it's being interpreted. And the philosophy of presented by Deen-Dayal Upadhyaya is the following. It is opposed to both Western capitalist individualism and Marxist socialism, though welcoming to Western science. Okay? So Deen-Dayal is opposed to capitalist individualism as professed by the United States and some European countries, and Marxist socialism as professed by the Soviet Union. But it welcomes Western science. It seeks a middle ground between capitalism and socialism, evaluating both systems on their respective merits while being critical of their excesses and alienness. Okay, now superficially, this seems to be something good, right? But wait a minute, let's hear the rest. The origin of Dina Dayal's concepts is partially, and to a great extent, Gandhianism. But listen to this. Advaita Vedanta, Upadhyaya, or Dina Dayal, was of the opinion that integral humanism followed the tradition of Advaita developed by Adi Shankara. Non-dualism represented the unifying principle of every object in the universe and of which humankind was a part. This, claimed Upadhyaya, was the essence and contribution of Indian culture. Now, this is big nonsense. This is big, big nonsense, because what does Advaita Vedanta lead to? Atheism. Therefore, most of the freedom fighters that were trying to get rid of the British were atheistic Hindus. And today, there's a certain part of the BJP is full of atheistic Hindus. Have you ever heard of that term, atheistic Hindus?
No.
Well, you better get used to it. See, now I'm not speaking in a political way now. Even though I'm mentioning the BJP, I'm just showing you how people, especially scholars, they write a book and they make a theory, and then they get it accepted, and that theory can be because it's not based on pure Krishna consciousness. It'll go for another 80 years or 100 years or 200 years and completely mislead people and cause havoc in society. See? So unless we become convinced about the philosophy of Vaishnavism, we can also be misled by these theories. Because myself, I would love to see the Vedic culture in India. But I don't want it to be interpreted as Hindutva based on Advaita Vedanta philosophy, because that would be a perversion of Vaishnava philosophy. Now, what is Vaishnava philosophy exactly? Well, the Gandhian concept of progress for all is definitely Vaishnava philosophy, but not Gandhi's understanding of it. Progress for all means Varna Ashrama system that helps all classes of people, even people that are outside the Vedic tradition, to make spiritual advancement and come at least to the mode of goodness, right? And from the mode of goodness, it's possible to go to transcendental goodness, right? But first you have to come to the mode of goodness. Now, most people are living in the modes of passion and ignorance. So the whole concept of Hindutva philosophy is based on the body. It's not based on genuine transcendental knowledge. And it's just like the Muslims have a movement, the Russian Orthodox Church, the Greek Orthodox Church, as I explained yesterday, those are all based on the body. Now, the Muslims also have an idea that there is such a thing, there's a bodily concept of being a Muslim, as well as in Christianity, in different sects of Christianity. At least the Catholic Church, they call it a universal church. They do not give an emphasis so much. It's not like the Italian Catholic Church. It is the universal Catholic Church. That is something that is correct in the sense that it does not identify a race or a group or an ethnicity. It's anybody, right? Krishna consciousness goes further than that. Krishna consciousness or pure Vaishnavism is talking about all living entities, the 8,400,000 species, to how to help all living entities progress spiritually. That includes the dogs, that includes the birds, that includes the sharks, that includes the snakes. There's a way of helping all living entities through Krishna consciousness. Prabhupada once explained how you can preach to an ant. He said, when you see an ant, you push a grain of sugar that has been offered to the deities near it, and you just go like this, Hare Krishna. Someone asked me, how do you preach to an ant, Prabhupada? He explained. So that understanding that all species are actually coming from Krishna originally, and Krishna incarnates in every species. We know of the big ones, the big titled ones, like Narashingadev and Matsya and Kurma, etc. But it's also explained that he incarnates in every species, and he can speak every language. One time, a lady heard Krishna speaking to the birds in their language, and she was amazed. This is in the Nectar of Devotion. So this is different. Krishna consciousness, pure Krishna consciousness, is a different thing, and it does not engage in race baiting or turning one group against another group. It's not based on identification politics where there's LGBTQ plus. It doesn't differentiate on those bases. It sees that all people have a relation, and all living entities have a relationship with Krishna, because he's present in the heart of every living entity as the super soul. So, okay, so this integral humanism is the basis of the VJP. And it says 4 objectives of humankind. Humankind, according to Upadhyaya, had 4 hierarchically organized attributes of body, mind, intellect, and soul, which corresponded to 4 universal objectives of dharma, moral duties, artha, wealth, kama, desire or satisfaction, and moksha, total liberation or salvation. Now, this sounds like Krishna consciousness, right? It's talking about the Varna ashrama system. But wait a minute. They avoid the ashrama part of it, and they just talk about the Varnas, right? And it says, while none could be ignored, dharma is the basic and moksha the ultimate objective of humankind and society. He, meaning Dinadayal Upadhyaya, claimed that the problem with both capitalist and socialist ideologies is that they only consider the needs of body and mind and were hence based on the materialist objectives of desire and wealth. Okay. Rejection of individualism. Upadhyaya rejected social systems in which individualism reigned supreme. Why? Because he's a Mayavadi, because he believes in Advaita or Kevala Advaita philosophy, absolute oneness. He also rejected communism, in which individualism was crushed as part of a large heartless machine. Society, according to Upadhyaya, rather than arising from a social contract between individuals, was fully born at its inception itself as a natural living organism with a definitive national soul or ethos, and its needs of the social organism paralleled those of the individual. Now that is a bunch of blah, blah, blah. What does it mean, though? Well, it means that he believes in Adi Shankar's or Shankar's non-dualism. In other words, there's only one soul. There's not infinite number of souls. and the infinite number of souls that we see in the world today is actually an illusion. In fact, the whole world is an illusion, according to Sankaracharya. However, at the end of Sankaracharya's life, he said, Bhaja Govindam, Bhaja Govindam, Bhaja Govindam, Mudamate, right? He said, give up, just chant the name of Govinda and give up your intellectual word jugglery and just surrender to Govinda, right? So, basically, Sankaracharya gave the truth, but at the end, his main disciple, codified Sankara's Kevala Advaita and ignored the final instruction of his guru, right? So because of that, today you have millions of people in India and around the world who are Kevala Advaitins. They believe in absolute oneness. They believe the world is an illusion. Therefore, you can play with it because it doesn't really exist. And that the goal of life is to merge into some kind of oneness. Okay, so I'm bringing this up only to show how devastating it is to have speculative philosophers. And the world is full of them. And they've been there throughout history. Okay, so now we were going to go over our homework, right? So, yes. Huh? Yeah. You're going to have to probably come up closer because you can speak into the microphone. Yes. See, when we do differentiation between races and ethnicities and things like that and emphasize it, it leads to strife. It leads eventually to a war. You know, and it's a very bad strategy. And Gandhi, when he said all religions are equal, that's also bad, because the Hindus believed it, but the Muslims never accepted it. You know, so rather we have to base everything not on Western science, but on spiritual science, as explained in the Vedas, especially Srimad Bhagavatam. Spiritual science says that all living entities have an equal relationship with God if they're willing to be trained in the principles of Krishna consciousness. Okay, go ahead.
So
Say what the homework is first.
The homework is about to write about material conception of life, Maharaj.
The material conception of life. Go ahead.
So, I wrote a short summary, and then I picked up all the places where...
Speak louder.
I wrote a short summary, and then I also picked up all the quotes from all the purports of Bhagavad Gita where material conception of life was mentioned by Srila Prabhupada.
Okay, just give us the summary right now.
Yeah. In the beginning of Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna was ready to give up the material life. In Bhagavad Gita 2.5, he says, I will live like a beggar. How can I fight and kill my elders to get worldly gains? However, Krishna teaches him that we do not have to give up material life, but we do have to give up the materialistic conception of life.
Very good.
In Bhagavad Gita 3.8, Krishna says, do your prescribed duty. Without doing your duty, you cannot be able to even maintain yourself. And he says that we have to perform our duty, but only as a service to the Lord, as an offering of our love. And that is how we will not be entangled. In the next verse, Bhagavad Gita 3.9, he says, work in a mood of sacrifice. Instead of working to gratify our own senses, we work as a matter of duty for the pleasure of the Lord's senses. We use all the material sources we have been given in the service of the Lord. This is the essence of giving up the materialistic conception of life. Materialistic conception of life means thinking that we are the products of matter, that we are the material bodies, and our life's ultimate goal is materialistic sense pleasures. Bhagavad Gita helps us understand that we are spirit souls and we are the parts and parcels of the whole Krishna, and by learning to love him, we can experience the supreme spiritual satisfaction. It guides us to practice bhakti, which helps us to see the connection to Krishna in everything and to use everything in the service of Krishna. When we give up the materialistic conception of life, we can be in the material life but won't be in material illusion. Bhagavad Gita 5.10, just as a lotus remains untouched, similarly by working in the mood of service and sacrifice, we can stay protected from illusion even when we are engaged in the material life. By the practice of bhakti, we develop the connection with Krishna and we develop the mood of loving service to Krishna, and that gives us life's supreme perfection.
Okay, now see, that is the most important point. That is the example of a drop of rainwater on the lotus petal. Now, the lotus petal has some kind of a external protective covering so that nothing sticks to it. So that's the example being given here, that if you're trained in Krishna consciousness, none of the nonsense of the philosophers and scientists and speculators will stick on you. It'll just roll right off. You might hear it, it'll just roll away, right? Like a drop of rain water on a lotus petal. So how do you get that training so you don't get illusioned by modern science and modern philosophies? And it's just like, we just gave an example of Hindutva philosophy. Unless you know Krishna consciousness, you would never see that there's something wrong with it. You see? Because a lot of it sounds like it's Vedic, right? It's very close to it. But the real intent is Advaita philosophy. And because of that, it will be flawed. And it is definitely espousing, that's a good word, espousing, ESP, espousing bodily identification in trying to define what a Hindu is. And obviously the word Hindu, the word idol, the word mythology, these three things have nothing to do with Vedic, with the Vedic culture. Hindu is not a Sanskrit word. It's a mispronunciation by the Muslims. Instead of saying Send, they said Hind, and all of a sudden, anybody on the other side of the Sindh River became Hindu, right? And then the British coined idol. So modern Hindus today refer to deities as idols, and they refer to the Vedas as mythology. This was the British conditioning that did that. So all the educated Hindus, they refer to deities as idols, and they refer to the Vedas as mythology. All this is completely destroying Vedic culture. Okay, go ahead. Yeah. So how, in other words, how to become immune to being contaminated by these by the misinformation, that is a very important point. Go ahead.
Yeah. By the practice of bhakti, we develop the connection with Krishna and we develop the mood of loving service to Krishna. And that gives us life's supreme perfection. Without having to reject the material life, we will be able to transcend the materialistic conception of life. So, should I read some quotes from...
Okay, good.
In Bhagavad Gita 2.2 purport, so Prabhupada says, persons who are led by the material conception of life do not know that the aim of life is realization of the absolute truth, Vishnu or Bhagavan, and they are captivated by the external features of the material world, and therefore they do not know what liberation is.
Okay, so captivated by the external conditions of the material world, right?
Yes.
What does that mean?
External
features. There's a new iPhone. Captivated by what?
External features of the material world.
Right. The iPhone, the Tesla, or the spa in space. All these things, it captivates people. It takes their mind off of Krishna completely, and because they get excited because it's a new type of sense gratification, right? What did the devil do to Eve? He told her that there's a type of sense gratification that God is hiding from you. That's why He's not letting you eat the apple on this particular tree. There was hundreds and thousands of fruit trees in the Garden of Eden or paradise, but God forbade eating from this one tree, and the devil said He's forbidding you to eat from it because it's a special type of sense gratification. And Eve believed him and ate the apple, and immediately she felt shame. And then misery likes company. She convinced Adam also to eat from it, and then both of them were forced to leave the Garden of Eden and suffer childbirth, working hard, or the Pavarga syndrome, as explained. And the whole thing, the whole idealistic life was rejected, and people felt are now suffering from, this is Christian philosophy, suffering from the sins of Adam and Eve. You see, but how did they become sinful? They believed the devil. They believed that God was hiding a type of sense gratification that they had never experienced, and it was false. There was no sense gratification involved in the apple and that tree. It was the tree of knowledge and sin. You notice how they use the word knowledge and sin, meaning false knowledge leads to sin. Okay, go ahead.
So in Bhagavad Gita purport, 2.7 purport, Prabhupada says, the Kripanas or miserly persons waste their time in being overly affectionate for family, society, country, etc. in the material conception of life.
Okay, now what does that mean, overly affectionate? Does that mean you should hate your family? No. The word overly affectionate means like this. Let's say you have a new car and you're paranoid that someone might scratch your car. It happens, like, for example, our Srinivas Prabhu, someone scratched his brand new Tesla. It happens all the time. I remember I bought my wife a Mercedes car, right? And a couple weeks after she was driving around with the car, someone purposely broke the Mercedes symbol in the front of the car. So it happens all the time, whether it's France or America or anywhere. India also it happens. People are jealous that you have such a good car. Okay, so that's the example of being overly attached to family. You go beyond what is normal, and every politician that gets caught having illicit activities, they do a mea culpa, which means they admit that they made a big mistake, and then they start talking about, well, the most important thing in my life now is family. Family's the main thing that counts. Why don't you think about that before you committed a sin, right? But no, they go back to saying, "Oh, family's the most important thing." See, that type of nonsense is what is what's being talked about. Overly affectionate for the family. To the point that you become completely selfish about your family, right? And you don't think about other people. You just think about your family. Go ahead.
One is often attached to family life, namely to wife, children and other members on the basis of skin disease. The Kripana thinks that he is able to protect his family members from death, or the Kripana thinks that his family or society can save him from the verge of death.
Kripana is a crippled person mentally. It means that one is very selfish and not liberal, very, very selfish. Brahmana, it means liberal. And Kripana means a very selfish person.
Such family attachment can be found even in the lower animals, who take care of children also. Being intelligent, Arjuna could understand that his affection for family members and his wish to protect them from death were the causes of his perplexities.
Yeah, because of his over, let's say, indulgence for his family, or
Overly affectionate.
overly affectionate, Arjuna refused to follow Krishna's order. In other words, something that leads you to say no to Krishna, I won't follow what you say, that definitely is something bad, isn't it? It's not something good. Go ahead.
Bhagavad Gita 9.32 purport. It is clearly declared here by the Supreme Lord that in devotional service there is no distinction between the lower and higher classes of people. In the material conception of life there are such divisions, but for a person engaged in transcendental devotional service to the Lord there are not. So they essentially,
Go ahead.
So essentially there is a material conception of life is dividing people into classes.
Yes.
Bhagavad Gita 13.8 to 12 purport. Humility means that one should not be anxious to have the satisfaction of being honored by others. The material conception of life makes us very eager to receive honor from others. But from the point of view of a man in perfect knowledge, who knows that he is not this body, anything, honor or dishonor, pertaining to this body is useless. One should not be hankering after this material deception. Bhagavad Gita 13.31 purport. In the material conception of life, we find someone a demigod, someone a human being, a dog, a cat, etc. This is material vision and not actual vision. This material differentiation is due to a material conception of life. After the destruction of the material body, the spirit soul is one. The spirit soul, due to contact with material nature, gets different types of bodies. When one can see this, he attains spiritual vision.
Okay, what does it mean the spirit soul is one? You just read that, right?
Yeah, after the destruction of the material body, the spirit soul is one.
And then what does it say after that?
The spirit soul, due to contact with material nature, gets different types of bodies. So
Okay, so one means
individual.
you're one in your identification, that you're the eternal servant of Krishna. Whereas when you get different bodies, you identify with the body.
Yeah.
So you're not one anymore. So let's say you're born in India and you're a Hindu. Then you convert to Christianity and come to America and you get American citizenship. Now you're an American Christian. Then you leave America because you feel as if it's not the right place. You go to Japan, and now you become a Japanese citizen. You see what's going on.
Different
right? They're not
identities.
one. They're going from one identification to another identification to another identification. So when the soul is one, that means that you no longer have any material bodies. Therefore, you are a one spirit soul, a unique person that is free from the material conception of life and from being covered by a material body. You're back in your original spiritual body, right?
Yes.
And with spiritual senses. So that when it says, it doesn't mean that you merge into some oneness. You no longer have multiple identifications. You know who you are. You are the eternal servant of God. You have in a spiritual body, and you're in the spiritual world where there's no more birth, death, old age, and disease. That's what it means. It's a big statement.
Yes.
The spirit soul is one. But you have to understand it correctly. Go ahead.
The spirit soul, due to contact with material nature, gets different types of bodies. When one can see this, he attains spiritual vision. Thus, being freed from differentiations like man, animal, big, low, etc., one becomes purified in his consciousness and able to develop Krishna consciousness in his spiritual identity.
Okay, so that's a very important point, because he's also hinting there that gender is not something eternal. That, however, how is there a differentiation between male and female in the spiritual world? Well, it's called prakriti. Prakriti means what is controlled, what is subordinate. So it also refers to the material nature, right? So we are all prakriti. All the men and women in this world are prakriti. We are all under the control of Krishna. We are all, therefore, we're not identified as male or female. We're identified as prakriti. Therefore, in the spiritual world, it is possible that someone who's a man in this world can assume what seems to be female role. Sometimes you read that Srila Jiva Goswami, he is such and such manjari in the spiritual world. You see. So whether you are so-called female or male, by the way, there's no sex in the spiritual world. There's no getting pregnant and giving birth to a child, right? So therefore, we are all prakriti. We are all the eternal servants of Krishna. Whether you're male or female in the material world, is not a necessity in the spiritual world, right? So we have to understand this, that otherwise, when you have the feminist movement, it actually is defining what is the material conception for a woman. It's not a spiritual conception. And then when you're a male chauvinist, you can look that word up, chauvinist, you're defining what is a man in the material world with the material conception of life. So these are all what you call misnomers, false identifications. Okay, go ahead. What's that mean, chauvinist?
A person displaying aggressive or exaggerated patriotism to something.
Right, but it also, look at the second meaning.
Showing or relating to excessive or prejudiced loyalty or support for a particular group of caste. Male chauvinism means excessive
Yes.
Loyalty to that particular group.
Right, exactly. What were the other words I asked you to look up? There was
Excessive or prejudiced loyalty or support for a particular group.
okay. So what else did I ask you to look up?
So there's
Segue.
Segue.
and then espousing.
Okay.
So segue is transition without interruption from one activity to another or one topic to another.
Right. And next?
And then espousing is supporting.
Right. Okay. And there's another word, patronizing. Patronizing. So patronizing has several meanings, but the first meaning is a male who patronizes, well, it's not specifically for a male, but it's an example. A male or a man who patronizes females, meaning disparages or denigrates females in belief they are inferior, and he treats them inferior to special treatment or benefits. That would be a male chauvinist, right? And who patronizes. Patronizes means basically condescending. You look down on someone, right? These are words, but it also means a person who goes and buys something in a store. He's a patron, so he patronizes that store. So it has two meanings, right? Okay, go ahead.
Bhagavad Gita 13.8 to 12, purport. People in general are trapped by ignorance in the material conception of life, and they perpetually suffer material pains. So unless one elevates people to spiritual knowledge, one is practicing violence. One should try this best to distribute real knowledge to the people, so that they may become enlightened, leave this material entanglement. That is non-violence.
This is what we're trying to do, right, by having these classes. So if I bring up the subject of Hindutva, or if I bring up the subject of Kevala Advaita, or I bring up the subject of feminism, or I bring up the subject of Freudian philosophy that is espousing free sex and things like that. These are real issues in this world today, and we must have an opinion about it from the Vaishnava point of view. Otherwise, we'll get bewildered. Go ahead.
Bhagavad Gita 3.28 purport. The knower of absolute truth is convinced of his awkward position in material association. He knows that he is part and parcel of the Supreme Personality of Godhead Krishna, and that his position should not be in the material creation. He knows his real identity as a part and parcel of the Supreme, who is eternal bliss and knowledge, and he realizes that somehow or the other he is entrapped in the material conception of life. In his pure state of existence, he is meant to dovetail his activities in devotional service to Supreme Personality of Godhead Krishna. He therefore engages himself in the activities of Krishna consciousness and becomes naturally unattached to the activities of material senses, which are all circumstantial and temporary. Bhagavad Gita 4.10. One has to get rid of all three stages of attachment to the material world: negligence of spiritual life, fear of a spiritual personal identity, and the conception of void that arises from frustration in life.
When it says fear of a personal identity, let's say you're my age, 76 years old, and you have diabetes, and you have some pains, arthritis, and you're suffering. And then someone tells you, you can be eternal. And you say, what? I don't want to be eternal with this arthritis and rheumatism. That's the way they understand eternal, right? That I'll eternally be suffering from this arthritis and diabetes and getting, my blood changed twice a week and things like that. There's no way. I don't want to be eternal. I want to die, So it's based on, the body again. As long as we base our knowledge on the body, we will always end up with the wrong conclusion. Right? Go ahead.
To get free from these...
In other words, we have no knowledge of our spiritual body and our eternality. Right?
To get free from these three stages of the material concept of life, one has to take complete shelter of the Lord, guided by the bona fide spiritual master, and follow the disciplines and regulative principles of devotional life. The last stage of devotional life is called bhava, or transcendental love of Godhead. Bhagavad Gita 2.41. The highest perfection of Krishna consciousness is renunciation of the material conception of life.
So important. The rejection of the material concept of life.
Yeah.
It's a very important point. That means that you've actually become Krishna conscious.
This state is automatically achieved by progressive Krishna consciousness.
Progressive means every day you're hearing, every day you're learning something new, you're adding to your realizations about the truth of the Vedic knowledge, especially as espoused or as given in the Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam and Chaitanya Charitamrita. You get more and more convinced, and therefore you are not going to be fooled by all the false propagandas out there.
Sure. Bhagavad Gita 13.35. If one accepts a spiritual master, one can learn to distinguish between matter and spirit, and that becomes the stepping stone for further spiritual realization. A spiritual master, by various instructions, teaches his students to get free from the material concept of life. For instance, in Bhagavad Gita, we find Krishna instructing Arjuna to free him from materialistic considerations.
Beautiful. Where is that?
13.35.
2:30.
13.35.
Okay.
Bhagavad Gita 6.25. By proper conviction and intelligence, one should gradually cease sense activities. At that time, there is no longer any danger of becoming engaged.
It says cease sense activities. How can you cease sense activities? That means your eyes, your ears, your nose, your tongue, your skin, mind, and intelligence. These are all knowledge-acquiring senses. So what does it say?
By proper conviction and intelligence, one should gradually cease sense activities. This is called pratyahara.
Okay, so what he means is not ceasing the functioning of the senses, but ceasing the sensuous functioning of the senses. Look that word up, sensuous. You see how easy it is to misinterpret something? Right? The way you read that, it sounds like, well, I got to put blindfolders on and earplugs and plug up my nose and stop eating and stop breathing, right? And that's not what it means. What does it say? Sensuous?
It's attracting or gratifying physically. That's one. Relating to or affecting the senses rather than the intellect. That's another one. And then sexually attractive is another one.
Right. That's what it means. So, giving up the sensuous use of the senses and adopting the Krishna conscious use of the senses, which is using them only for the pleasure of Krishna. That's what it means when it says stop the senses. Okay?
Yeah. The mind being controlled by conviction, meditation and cessation from the senses should be situated in trance or samadhi.
That means, what is real samadhi? Look it up on the index of Bhagavad. Well, I'll look it up. What is real samadhi? Real samadhi is not sitting in a cave and meditating on nothingness or meditating on the Brahman. Real samadhi is always engaged in Krishna consciousness. Let me see if I can find it, a direct statement of it by Prabhupada. Because the Mayavadis are looking for samadhi also. But their samadhi is not the same samadhi of the devotees. Okay, and sixth chapter. Yeah. In the sixth chapter, verses 20 to 23, Bhagavad Gita. In the stage of perfection called trance or samadhi, one's mind is completely restrained from material mental activities by practice of yoga. This perfection is characterized by one's ability to see the self by the pure mind and to relish and rejoice in the self. Self meaning oneself. In that joyous state, one is situated in boundless transcendental happiness, realized through transcendental senses. Established thus, one never departs from the truth, and upon gaining this, he thinks there is no greater gain. Being situated in such a position, one is never shaken, even in the midst of the greatest difficulty. This indeed is actual freedom from all miseries arising from material contact. Okay, now, wait a minute. Let's not jump to any conclusions. That's the verse, right? But let's see what the explanation is of that. It's basically saying that you're going to find the truth and you're going to be completely satisfied by it within, not without. All right? So what does that mean? Prabhupada says, the duality of knowledge and knower is not accepted by the non-dualist. But in this verse, transcendental pleasure, realized through the transcendental senses, is accepted. And this is corroborated by Patanjali Muni, the famous exponent of the yoga system. The great sage declares in his Yoga Sutras 3.34, Purushartha sunyanam gunanam pratipras sava kaivalyam swarupa pratistava chitti shaktir iti. This chitti shakti, or internal potency, is transcendental. Purusartha means material religiosity, economic development, sense gratification, and at the end, the attempt to become one with the Supreme. So this is what the Hindutvas are basing their philosophy on, right? The mundane Varna system. They don't even talk about ashrama. They just talk about the Varna system. So That is religiosity, right? That means dharma.
Dharma,
Economic development, artha. Sense gratification,
kama,
dharma, artha, kama. And at the end, attempt to become one with the Supreme.
moksha.
That means mukti, dharma, artha, kama.
Moksha.
Yeah. So, this oneness with the Supreme is called kaivalyam by the monists, by the Mayavadis. But according to Patanjali, this kaivalyam is an internal or transcendental potency by which the living entity becomes aware of his constitutional position. What is the constitutional position? The eternal servant of Krishna. In the words of Lord Chaitanya, this state of affairs is called Cheto Darpana Marjanam, or clearance of the impure mirror of the mind, getting all the nonsense of modern science and all the speculation of the bogus philosophers out of the mind and replacing it with genuine Atma Tattva, knowledge of the eternal soul and its relationship to Krishna. Right? In the words of Lord Chaitanya, this state of affairs is called Cheto Darpana Marjana, or clearance of the impure mirror of the mind. This clearance is actually liberation, or Bhava Mahadavagni Nirvapanam. In other words, you're experiencing Bhava, transcendental happiness, due to chanting Hare Krishna and understanding there's no difference between the name Krishna and Krishna himself. Right? And that makes you very, very happy and full of ecstatic feelings, right? The theory of nirvana, also preliminary, corresponds with this principle. In the Bhagavatam 2.10.6, this is called Swarupena Vyavastiti. The Bhagavad Gita also confirms this situation in this verse. After nirvana or material cessation, there is the manifestation of spiritual activities or devotional service to the Lord. This is nirvana with the correct definition, not the Buddhist definition of nirvana. It means that the mind is no longer deviated from Krishna. Right? In the words of the Bhagavatam, Swarupena Vivastiti, this is the real life of the living entity. Maya, or illusion, is the condition of spiritual life contaminated by material infection. Liberation from this material infection, which means the material concept of life, does not mean destruction of the original eternal position of the living entity. Patanjali also accepts this by his words, Kaivalyam Swarupa Pratishta Va Chitti Shakti Iti. This Chitti Shakti, or transcendental pleasure, is real life. This is confirmed in the Vedanta Sutra 1.1.12 as Anandamaya Vyasad. This natural transcendental pleasure is the ultimate goal of yoga and is easily achieved by execution of devotional service, or bhakti yoga. Bhakti yoga will be vividly described in the 7th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. So he connects Patanjali's yoga system, Buddhism, real Buddhism, not phony Buddhism, and also Srimad Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita, and explains that they're all saying the same thing, that at a certain point you feel internally this transcendental happiness when you realize that Krishna and his holy name are Advaita, non-different, non-dual. That's the real Advaita. Krishna and his holy name are one. And I am also one with Krishna in the sense that I follow his instructions, just like a son or daughter who always follows the instructions of the parents is one with them. But still, they're different individuals, but they both agree. They both have a consensus to cooperate. Okay, go ahead.
Bhagavad Gita 6.25. By proper conviction and intelligence, one should gradually... At that time, there is no longer any danger of becoming engaged in the material conception of life.
By what? By proper what?
By proper conviction and intelligence, one should gradually cease sense activities. This is called pratyahara.
Cease what?
Sense activities.
Okay. Again, giving up sensuousness. Sensuousness means attachment to sex and sense gratification, right? When it says giving up sense activities, it means giving up the sensuous pursuit of sense gratification.
This is called pratyahara. The mind being controlled by conviction, meditation, and cessation from the senses should be situated in trance or samadhi. At that time, there is no longer any danger of becoming engaged in the material conception of life.
So samadhi is not you're alone in a cave meditating. Samadhi is you're always engaged in devotional service with the purpose of pleasing Guru and Krishna. That is real samadhi. And that gives you this internal, overwhelming feeling of happiness.
In other words, although...
Look what happened to Adam and Eve. As soon as they violated God's instruction, they felt shame. Right? And look what happens to a person. As soon as they commit sinful activity, they feel guilty sometimes. Like one lady told me, my husband forced me to have an abortion. And I did it, and now I regret it. It's the worst thing I've ever done. So once you're convinced of doing something sinful, and then you do it, you feel bad about it. Because, I mean, some people feel good, but most people feel bad. And they regret having done that.
In other words, although one is involved with matter as long as the material body exists, one should not think about sense gratification.
See, now it's not saying, not think about the senses, right? He's using the word sense gratification.
Yeah.
That's what it means.
One should not think about sense gratification. One should think of no pleasure aside from the pleasure of the Supreme Self. This state is easily attained by directly practicing Krishna consciousness.
Capitalized, or is it a small s?
Capital S.
Okay, so that means Krishna. When the s is small, it means the living entity. Yeah. In other words, we should always be thinking of Krishna.
Yes. Bhagavad Gita 18:51 to 53. When one is freed from the material conception of life, he becomes peaceful and cannot be agitated. This is described in Bhagavad Gita 2:70.
Vidura was not agitated because Duryodhana insulted him. He was happy, but he didn't express the happiness. He kept it within himself. But he was happy because now he could walk away from Dhritarashtra and Duryodhana and the Kurus. And later on he found out they were all killed. They're all killed, every one of them, right? Karna and his buddies. Anyway, I forget the name. They all died, right? So he'd made the right decision walking away from it. Right? Go ahead.
This is described in Bhagavad Gita 2:70.
Saguni, yeah.
Shakuni, yeah.
Yeah.
This is described in Bhagavad Gita 2:70. A person who is not disturbed by the incessant flow of desires that enter like rivers into the ocean, which is ever being filled but is always still, can alone achieve peace, and not the man who strives to satisfy such desires.
You have so much transcendental knowledge and so much transcendental activity that you're not disturbed by anything anymore. Because you know, I have an eternal soul. An insult is not insulting me. It's insulting maybe my false ego, but it's not me. This pain that I'm feeling, it's in the body, but it's not in my soul. So I can tolerate it. You see? You're no longer disturbed by anything in the world. Go ahead.
Yeah. The last one, being His Divine Grace, Srila Sachidananda.
I'll give you an example. There's an example, a real example. There was a bus going up to Badrik Ashram, right? And the road is very dangerous, right? And people were doing kirtan in the bus. And the bus driver, for some reason or other, goes off the cliff.
Yeah.
And as they're going down, everyone's saying, Hari Bol! Hari Bol! Jai Shri Krishna Bhagavan Ki Jai! And they died. You see? They were not disturbed. But otherwise, other people, you know, the airplane is going down. They start screaming, you know, and they're freaking out completely, right? But in this bus, they were all saying, Hari Bol, Jai Shri Krishna Bhagavan, you know, and they died. Now, it's not funny, but it just shows you where their mind was. They were going on pilgrimage, right?
Consciousness.
And they were not disturbed at least that's the story, by that terrible, death. Go ahead.
His Divine Grace Srila Sachidananda Bhaktivinoda Thakura's Appearance Day Lecture, London, September 3, 1971. So in this lecture, Prabhupada says, so after being liberated from the material concept of life by the blessings of Krishna and Guru, one comes to the platform of first class knowledge, where he engages himself directly in the service of the Lord. That is the first class knowledge. First class knowledge means beyond liberation. Second class knowledge is trying for liberation. Third class knowledge means in bondage like animal. The animals, they are bound up by the particular type of body and has no, I mean to say, possibility of becoming liberated. That is animal life. But human life is better than animal life, because if he likes, he can make himself liberated from this bondage of material body. That is the facility. He can understand himself what he is. He can understand what is God. He can understand the relationship between God and himself. He can understand what is this material world. Because there are thousands of books of knowledge, take it for Bhagavad Gita. Everything is there, and it is meant for human being, not for the cats and dogs. Cats and dogs cannot understand, but a human being can understand.
That's a great quote, and that's from a lecture.
Yes, Maharaj.
You have to send me your notes.
Yes, Maharaj.
Wonderful. Go ahead. Any more?
That's it.
We want more.
So there's more in, there is lot more in Bhagavatam and lectures.
Why don't you compile them?
Yeah, I'll come.
Good. All right. So it's a little late, I think. Did they do the Aarti? No. So we should do it now. So now, our homework is, you did a very good job, and do more. Okay? You see how important it is to understand the material conception of life. So I'm still waiting to get Shresta's homework. She was supposed to do. Oh, no, I know, but. Huh? I think her homework was the benefits of Kali Yuga. Right. Okay. We know the downsides of Kali Yuga, but we want to know the benefits. Okay. All right. So I want to see, the homework should be make a list of all the things that is destroying traditional culture. So I went through a list of about 13 things, but make your own list of what you think is destroying modern culture, destroying traditional culture. Traditional culture means the Vedic culture that was practiced for millions of years, and now in modern times is being destroyed. Okay? I will work on it also. Haribol. All glories to Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. There's things like, mythology, idols, and everything is relative, and there's no God, there's nothing after death, and the word Hindu. All these, you see how words have important meanings. When you start understanding what is meant by these meanings, then you begin to see how much it's nonsense. Who is going to sing? Any of the kids? Who's going to do the sing?
Shri Guru Charana Padma Kevala Bhakati Sadma
Shri Guru Charana Padma Kevala Bhakati Sadma
Vandamo Isavadana Mate
Vandamo Isavadana Mate
Jahara Prasade Pai E Bhava Toriya Jai
Janar Prasade Bai He Bhavatoriya Jai
Krishna Prapti Ho Jai Hote
Aarti Urja Hoite
Guru Mukha Padma Vakya Chite Te Koriya Kya
Guru Mukha Padma Vakya Chite Te Koriya Kya
Arana Kori Ho Mane Asha
Arana Koriya Mane Asa
Shri Guru Charane Rati Aise Uttamagati
Shri Guru Charane Rati Aise Uttamagati
Je Prasade Pure Sarva Asha
Ye Prasade Pure Sarvasa
चक्षुदान दिलो जय जन्मे जन्मे प्रभु से
Chakshudan Dila Jai Janme Janme Prabhu Se
चक्षुदान दिलो जय जन्मे जन्मे प्रभु से
Chakshudan Dila Jai Janme Janme Prabhu Se
दिव्य ज्ञान हृदय प्रकाशितो
Nide Prakasito
दिव्य ज्ञान हृदय प्रकाशितो
Gajito
प्रेम भक्ति जहाँ होते अविद्या विनाश जते
Ma Bhakti Jaha Hoite Avidya Vinasta Jate
वेदे गाय जहाँ रचरितो
Vedega Janara Charito
श्री गुरु करुणा सिंधु आदम जनर बंधु
Shikuru Karuna Sindhu Adana Janara Bandhu
लोकनाथ लोकेर जीवाना
Nana
हा प्रभु करो दया देहो मोरे पद चया
Mahaprabhu Pura Doya Deya Murli Padachaya
एबे गाय दुषुक त्रिभुवाना
Ebeyas Sukhi Bhuvana
शीला प्रभुपाद पतित पवाना
Prabhupada Patita Bhavana
जय प्रभुपाद जय प्रभुपाद जय प्रभुपाद जय प्रभुपाद
Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada
जय गुरुदेवा जय गुरुदेवा जय गुरुदेवा जय गुरुदेवा
Jaya Gurudeva Jaya Gurudeva Jaya Gurudeva Jaya Gurudeva
नमो विष्णुपदाय Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Iti Namine
Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Vishaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namini
Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pachatya Deshatarine
Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pacharine Nirvishesha Shunyavani Paschatya Desatarine
Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadara Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda
Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadara Shivasadi Gaura Chavinda
Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare
Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare
Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare
Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare
Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jila Prabhupada
Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada
Jaya Guru Deva Jaya Guru Deva Jaya Guru Deva Jaya Guru Deva
Jaya Guru Deva Jaya Guru Deva Jaya Guru Deva Jaya Guru Deva
Nitai Gaura Hari Bol Hari Bol Hari Bol Nitai Gaura Hari Bol
Jaya Guru Hari Bol Hari Bol Hari Bol Nitai Gaura Hari Bol Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Paravajiksha Statra Satra Shishi Shimad His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Anant Koti Vaishnava Ki Jai Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Prem Sikaho Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhaktivedanta Ki Jai Shri Radha Krishna Gopinath Sam Kunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhan Ki Jai Shri Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai Shri Mayapura Dham Ki Jai Jagannath Puri Dham Ki Jai Tulasi Devi Ki Jai Bhakti Devi Ki Jai Ganga Maya ki jai, Jamuna Maya ki jai, Samaveda Bhaktavinda ki jai, Nitai Gora Premanandi. All glories to assembled, all glories to assembled devotees, all glories to assembled, all glories to Shri Guru and Shri Guru, all glories to Srila Prabhupada, Patita Bhavana ki jai. The lotus feet of our spiritual master, the only way by which we attain pure devotion. I bow down to his lotus feet with great awe and reverence. By his grace, one can cross the ocean of material suffering and obtain the mercy of Krishna. My only wish is to have my consciousness purified by the words emanating from his lotus mouth. Attachment to his lotus feet is the perfection which fulfills all desires. He opens my darkened eyes and fills my heart with transcendental knowledge. He is my Lord, birth after birth. From him ecstatic prema emanates. By him ignorance is destroyed. The Vedic scriptures sing of his character. Our spiritual master is the ocean of mercy, the friend of the poor and the Lord and master of devotees. O Master, be merciful unto us. Give us the shade of your lotus feet. Your fame is spread throughout all the three worlds. We take shelter of your lotus feet. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna. Namaste Saraswati. Gaur Premanandi. Okay. When did you send it?
Yesterday.
Okay. Good.